Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're just thrilled today that that we have Dr. Carla Stover joining us from Yale, and it feels like the other end of the earth for those of us who haven't gotten away to travel anywhere recently. But we're just so glad, Carla, that you could make some time to venture virtually to Manitoba. And for those of you who've left time in your day to join us, we're excited about this. We never know how big these are going to get. We don't, just one other quick little announcement that next month we're working on a day and a presentation, but one of the plans that we had fell through. So stay tuned. We'll let you know when we have something for April. But today's topic just feels incredibly timely because, as we've all been aware, those of us in this field, that the pandemic has exacerbated something that was already quite out of hand, and that is intimate partner violence and substance abuse. And so we know that those numbers that have been reported have been astronomical, and we know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. But the other thing that I'm really looking forward to hearing about today is a couple of things. One is Carla, in your work, this is specifically for dads, which we often have. It's the one place that the gender bias doesn't tip in favor of women, right? Or it does tip in favor of women, that we've put together a fair amount of programming for women who have been involved in intimate partner violence, but we've kind of forgotten about these dads. And so I'm excited to hear this from you. And the other piece is that sometimes you involve both both partners in your treatment, because that's also been something that's been a new perspective. And so just so excited to have you join us today to talk about this. We've sent around your biography, and it's long, and I'm going to encourage people to look you up and Google you, but I don't want to steal any more minutes away from you. So welcome, Carla, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be joining you today from New Haven, Connecticut, in the US. So I'm going to share my screen. I do have some slides to share and a very short video as well. Please do save your questions, put them in the chat throughout, and we will try to save time to get to them at the end. All right, is that coming through? The slides? Thumbs up? Yes, okay. All right, so I'm going to be talking today about working with high-risk fathers in treatment. And I'm going to be focusing a lot on an intervention that I developed called Fathers for Change, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes. I just want to set the context. So I came to this, so I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I came to this work first through my work with mothers and young children. I did my graduate training at the University of California's Child Trauma Research Project with Alicia Lieberman and Patricia Van Horn, and was doing a lot of work with moms and young children who had experienced violence. And then I came to Yale and was working with a program called the Child Development Community Policing Program, where we were doing outreach to families after a domestic had occurred. We were going jointly with police to talk to primarily survivors and children about symptoms and get them connected with resources. And what I learned through that work is that, and this was over a decade ago now, so it was some time ago, but what I learned is that, you know, we were focusing a lot on trying to connect women, get women out, get women safe, get children safe, which is all really important work. But we weren't focusing at all on the fathers who were continuing to have contact with their kids, continuing to be in the lives of their children. Many, many, many of the women that I came into contact with, I'd say 50 to 75%, really had no intention, and this was in the community, this is not a shelter population, these were women in the community that we were meeting with. They had no intention really of either ending the relationship, or they were fully aware that the father was going to continue to have contact with their children. And so I started to think about the fact that there weren't any programs really available for those dads, and why weren't we doing anything about that? So that's how I came to start this work. I'll tell you first a little bit about a case to just kind of get you thinking about this. So I met Jose this was a couple of years ago now, and he came to my office. He had been referred to participate in a reunification therapy with his daughters. And when he sat in my office, and he was referred because, you know, people in the community here knew that I worked a lot with dads who'd had histories of domestic violence and, you know, thought a lot about the needs of the children in that context. So they referred him to me. And when he came into my office, he sat down, and you know, I was trying to ask him questions about how, you know, how he came to be in my office and, you know, what had happened. And he leaned forward and he looked at me and he said, "I'm not a monster. Everyone thinks I'm a monster. And no one can see anything else when they hear about what I did, what happened." So he was very hesitant to tell me the story because he didn't want me to suddenly be jaded about who he was. And Jose's story is an interesting one, and it's not hugely typical, but there's some typical components. So he had 2 daughters that were, at the time that I met him, 9 and 6. And there had been an intimate partner violence incident nearly 3.5 years ago. The couple had been married. He and his wife, Serena, had been married. I've changed these names, of course. Had been married. And there had been sort of a buildup of tension and a lot of verbal aggression between them. And the final incident was a physical incident when she was holding the youngest of the daughters at that time, who was 2.5 at the time of the incident, where he was, you know, yelling and screaming at her and pushed her, and she was holding the little girl. There was a full no contact protective order that was put in place at the time of the incident, and it had remained in place for 3 years. And so our Department of Children and Families had closed the case after, you know, Serena moved out. She got her own place. Dad was not allowed to be near them. And so Child Protective Services referred the mom and the kids to services and closed the case. And that was the end of it. Jose was required by the courts to do what we call in the United States, a family violence education program, which is basically a 9-session psychoeducational group on power and control and that kind of stuff. And then he also was then supposed to do reunification therapy after the protective order was lifted. So basically he did a very short intervention and then had a very long time where he was not allowed to see his daughters. Serena was referred to domestic violence services and a program called Child First, which does include child parent psychotherapy, was recommended for the girls. So the girls and mom got a good amount of service. Dad, not so much. And he hadn't seen his daughters for 3 years. And so he was tearful. He was angry. He didn't think that I was going to be able to help him. And there was really this feeling that if he talked to me about his behavior, that he was not going to get to see his kids because his experience had been, anything I admit just makes things worse for me. So it was really a tough situation. And when I met his daughter, so I met him for a few sessions and then I met his daughters to meet them, and I met the co-parent, each separately. And the co-parent was ready so Serena was ready for the kids to have a relationship with their dad. She thought it was important that they have a relationship with their dad. She said, they ask about him all the time. I don't know what to say. And the girls, I met them, they came into my office, they sat down, and I said, well, do you know who I am? And they said, yes, you're the person who's helping our dad. Do you know where he is? Is he okay? So 3 years have gone by and they don't really understand where their dad is. And I'm not saying that the mother didn't try to explain things to them or anything like that. I just mean like having no context of seeing him or knowing that he was all right was hard for them. So I tell this story because this is a situation where I feel like the system that we have in place didn't really serve this family particularly well, in terms of some parts of it worked very well, right? Mom got out, she got safe, she got her own housing, the kids got treatment, all of that, those parts of the system worked great. But the side for the dad didn't work well. So this man had 3 years, he could have been getting some kind of services and therapy, right, to improve himself, his parenting, his behavior. He got a 9-session educational group, right? So I tell this story to set the context of how this work has developed. So I'm not going to talk really much about what IPV is. We all know that it includes a range of behaviors, it can be sexual, it can be psychological, or verbal in nature. Happens much more for women, although men can be victims, and we do get a lot of bidirectional violent cases in our clinic. But women are much more likely to be severely injured, for sure. We also know that there's a significant overlap between those who use violence, are using substances, and have maltreatment behaviors. So if you interview men coming into what we call batterer intervention programs, those groups that are usually court mandated, about 50% are using substances or have a substance use problem. If you interview men coming into substance abuse treatment, about 50% will tell you that they have IPV in their relationships. And there's about a 50% overlap with IPV or substance use and child maltreatment. So there's a lot of co-occurrence of those three issues, right? And we often deal with them separately as if they're not connected to each other. But they really are connected to each other, because the same kinds of things that cause people to become dysregulated and aggressive are the same kinds of things that reasons people use substances, right? Because they're trying to cope and manage those emotions, and the same kinds of feelings that can result in intimate partner violence can also result in child maltreatment. Not always, and not in every case, but there's a lot of overlap there. So there's that's just to say there's siloed treatments for families where there's been intimate partner violence, and if there's overlapping substance use or child maltreatment, there's these siloed services where, if there's substance use, men are referred to a substance use program, they're referred for some sort of, IPV programming, usually some sort of group. And then sometimes if they're involved with child protection, they also get sent to a parenting group, which is often sometimes it's Circle of Security or something like that. Other times it's a parent education group of some kind. The mothers, get sent to their own IPV services, advocacy, and things like that. They usually have to do some sort of parenting program if they've been reported to Child Protective Services, and they often need some other mental health services as well. And then the children get referred to mental health. So there's all these systems working with a family, and they're not coordinating, they're not talking to each other. And it can be very, very difficult for families that are trying to stay together to actually manage all of these services. So when we think about intervention for men, I'm going to say men who cause harm, I think it's very important that we move away from this language of batterers and perpetrators, because when we do that, we criminalize the person. We don't think about them as a person who actually might recover and do well. We think about punishing them. So I've used the term batterers because that's how it's used out in the community settings. But when I speak about my program, you'll hear me use different language. So when men cause harm, they're usually referred to groups, these batterer groups. They're based on this power and control wheel here, which I'm sure you are all very familiar with. And this is a very important tool, and it has some important implications. And we do reference it in the work with Fathers for Change. But a lot of times the batterer intervention groups, this is what they focus. The Duluth model focuses entirely on this wheel and just going through each slice of the pie and having the participants talk about this particular kind of violence and that sort of thing. And it's been the unchallenged treatment of choice, at least here in the States. I can't speak for Canada as much, but in the States, it's pretty much what's been out there and what's court mandated. And even some of the states have laws that this is what's required. There's been a mix of different things that have been added in. So people have taken the Duluth wheel and that part of the group and then added in anger management skills or added in some other cognitive behavioral therapy kinds of techniques with it. But in general, it has not been found to be overly effective in terms of there's now been at least 4 meta-analyses that have shown that program implemented as a one-size-fits-all approach isn't effective. It just doesn't reduce violence with everybody. Does it help some people? Sure, absolutely, but not every person that shows up in court. This is what they should get, right? Or every person that's referred to Child Protective Services for violence. This is what they should get. No. So what I was interested in doing was trying to fill the gap of some of these things that I've mentioned. So this overlap between IPV, substance use, and child maltreatment. There was really a lack of assessment of individual family needs when it came to domestic violence or intimate partner violence. It was kind of like, okay, dad does this, maybe, and then, you know, mom, you go to DV services, and that's it. The treatments ignored the fathering role entirely, so the batterer intervention groups don't really focus on fatherhood or parenting. Maybe they have a session or two with that, but they can't focus on it because they have men in there that aren't children. I mean, that aren't children, men that don't have children in the groups. So there can't be a cohesion around, we're a group of fathers talking about this together. Fathers weren't being held accountable. So in our child protective system in the US, child protection was putting the full burden really on the mothers of protecting the children. So if they stayed with someone who had been abusive, then they were being neglectful of their children by staying with the abuser. Rather than making the fathers accountable, well, he's the one who's violent, he's the one who's doing this to the children, so he's the one that should be responsible for keeping the children safe. So we wanted to try to put some treatment opportunities in place that Child Protective Services could actually use and refer fathers to, and give them the opportunity to participate in interventions that we often provide to mothers who have maltreated their kids or who have abused substances. So those are the gaps. That's my long-winded way of getting us to talking more about Fathers for Change. So this is the intervention that I've developed over the last, I'd say 12 years now, through support from a K-23 grant from the National Institute of Drug Abuse and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. They provided my initial funding support, and I've since had several other funding sources that I'll mention later. It was originally designed for fathers who had both co-occurring IPV and substance use, but now we've sort of broadened it out, and I've done it with dads who primarily have substance use problems, and I've done it with dads who have IPV behaviors, but they don't have substance use problems. So it's fairly flexible in what it can provide. The mechanisms are this. So Fathers for Change is an individual treatment. It's a clinical treatment. It's not a group. And I'll go into more of the components in a minute, but I wanted to start by telling you the targets. So I've been working and thinking for a long time about common pathways to intimate partner violence, child maltreatment, and substance use, these three co-occurring issues. And one of the things that seems to be consistent is a lot of these dads have poor reflective functioning, so the ability to think about their feelings and emotions and also reflect on the feelings and emotions of others and how those are connected to behaviors, right? And then poor emotion regulation. So many, I'd say 80 to 90% of the dads that we come into contact with have had fairly traumatic histories of their own. Either they were maltreated themselves, witnessed domestic violence, or had other forms of trauma, discrimination, racism that they experienced. And that's really contributing to their reflective functioning and emotion regulation difficulties. And so we target those in Fathers for Change primarily, and I'll get into some more details about how we do that. But the idea is that by focusing on those two things, that we're going to help fathers improve their understanding of their emotions, their triggers, their thoughts and actions, how that's connected to how they grew up, their own experiences with their parents, right? And also giving them concrete skills for how to improve their emotion regulation. So identifying the why, and then what do we do about it to change it, with the goal of then reducing IPV, child maltreatment if it's present, and reducing substance use if that's in the picture as well. So it's for biological fathers of a child under the age of 12. We started out doing it with fathers of very young children, so children under 5, and then we moved up to 10 and then 12, and I've even got some clinicians who've tried it with modifications with some adolescents, and it needs to be modified quite a bit to be used with adolescents. But some of the core sessions can be used with any dad. They have to have a history of physical or psychological violence. Substance use can be a concern, as I mentioned, but they have to have some contact with their children, or there has to be imminent child contact that's going to be coming. I mentioned John, the man who had not seen his kids in 3 years, but we knew he was about to start having contact with them. It includes 18 possible topics that are delivered over approximately 16 to 24 weeks. It can go longer depending on the dad, or shorter. We've set it when we do our research studies, we try to set a certain number of sessions that they receive. But when we do it just generally in practice, some dads go longer, some dads shorter. It's not a group, as I mentioned, it's entirely an individual therapy. It has some core topics, and then it also has some optional topics. And there's optional co-parent participation in some aspects of the intervention, and there's optional child participation in some sessions of the intervention. And you may be saying that's a lot of optional stuff, Carla. And it is because not all families are ready for all parts. And so I wanted to design an intervention that could be delivered to families depending on where they are in their progression of recovery from domestic violence. And so sometimes co-parents don't have an interest in participating. And so I didn't want dads to not be able to come to the program if they didn't have a partner who would participate, or a partner who said, no, I don't want our child participating in treatment. I didn't want the dad to not be able to still participate in the program. And I also wanted it to be that clinicians could assess safety and how safe and helpful, clinically helpful, each of the components were going to be for a particular family. So some families are ready to do co-parenting joint sessions together, and some, that's not a good idea. It's not safe, and we're not going to recommend doing it. So it gives the clinician that flexibility. So I came to this and developing this through a lens of survivor and child safety as the primary, while trying to, lift up these dads into their roles as dads. So we start with assessment, which is an individual meeting with the dad. It can be a long session, or it's broken up into 2 sessions. We also try to schedule an individual meeting with the mother, the co-parent of the children. In this case, some people may say, well, some dads have more than one co-parent. Yes, they do. And so we usually will go with the co-parent of the youngest child, who is typically the one who has had the most recent DV incident, unless that's not the case. So we have a case where the most recent partner, there wasn't DV, but the partner before that is the one that he's had the DV incidents with during child exchanges. So then in that case, we actually have worked with both co-parents, because which makes it more complicated, but we felt it was needed in that case. So the co-parents come in to provide information as collateral informants, but also for us to get to know them and know a little bit about their history, their trauma histories, their symptom picture. Are they having difficulties? So that we understand their needs as well. We include a father-child play assessment because we want to see the dad actually interacting with his children and what that looks like. And we do that after we've met with the dad, after we've met with the mom, and we think that that's an okay thing to do. And we'll include a record review and collateral contact with other providers. So that could include child protection, it could include getting police reports or information from other therapists or providers who've been involved with the family in the past. So this is a graphic that gives you some information, gives you the flow of how the treatment works. So if you think about it being a 4 to 6 month treatment, which, for some guys it can go longer, and some guys, they really stick to the shorter side of things, depending on the nature of who they are as a person and also the complexity of their families. So as I mentioned, we start with this assessment, and then we move into what we call the motivational engagement phase, which is focused on just getting dads engaged in wanting to be in the treatment program. So I would say, a good 80% of the guys that we get have no interest in being in treatment. They're only there because someone has told them they need to do it. We get very few self-referrals. It does happen occasionally. And I think as we're getting more of a reputation, we're getting a few more self-referrals, which is optimistic. People are starting to hear about it in the community as a place for dads. And so that's good. But we try to focus on using motivational interviewing, really focusing on their role as a dad, what kind of dad they want to be, what's their relationship like with their children, focusing on their importance as fathers. So during the father-child play assessment, we actually video record those. And we do that so that when we meet with the dad during the motivational engagement phase, we watch that back with the dad, and we highlight the ways that we see positive things happening with his child. We point out the ways that his child is engaging with him or trying to engage with him, because we want the dads to feel that we're partners with them, that we see them as valuable and successful. I go back to John, who thought, sure, I was going to see him as a monster, and there's no way I was going to view him any other way. And so that kind of, they're coming to the program assuming they're going to be evaluated and critiqued, which we will help them work on their weaknesses, but we first want them to feel like we can actually see their value and the things that they can bring to the table. So we do a video interactive guidance kind of session where we video, and then we pick clips that we play back and watch together. And we do that to try to help understand the dad's reflective capacity too, like what was he feeling when he was playing with his child? What does he think his child was feeling? To just sort of continue to assess like his capacity in that area. We also do a genogram during this phase where we do a full genogram of the dad's background to try to understand his family of origin, look for patterns, things he experienced growing up, his role models or lack thereof for parenting and partnering. So many of our dads have have had their own fathers had many partners and many children with many partners. That's it's not universal, but it's a fairly common theme that we see in the men that get referred here where I live. So we do that all with the idea that we're trying to help the dad get motivated to want to change his behavior. Like we see him as important. He is important to his kids. There's ways he can really be valuable to his children, even if he's not in a relationship with their mother anymore. And what are some of the areas that he wants to focus on and change? And then we move into the individual focus part of the treatment, which is where we really, it's very cognitive behavioral therapy focused and reflective functioning focused, emotion regulation skills, all of that stuff. So we focus on the reflective functioning throughout. But this is the place where we really try to get him to focus on himself and his own experiences. What are the things that trigger him? What are the times that he gets hostile or aggressive, or he just gets emotionally dysregulated, or the times that he withdraws? So we see these dads who are really reactive, right? That's one thing that happens when people have had a traumatic past. Or we see these dads that are emotionally withdrawn and they're completely cut off from their feelings. And so we try to identify for that dad, like what is happening for him? How can he become more reflective about that process and get more connected with his own experiences? And so we teach a variety of different things here too, related to physiological reactivity to stress. What happens in your body when you experience stress? What does that do to your thinking? What does it do to the way you act toward people? How do you get back in the driver's seat of your stress response system? So we kind of go over some of these really concrete things that help the dads think about that. So we have a lot of dads who will say, oh, I don't get angry. And then we have this, we use this device called an M wave, and we'll have them hook up to the M wave, which provides biofeedback basically. And so then we'll have them talk about something, and then they get to watch, like they don't think they're actually aroused at all, but then the device is like in the red zone, like, oh, it looks like actually like you don't know that you are, but you actually, your body is saying that you are actually reacting here. And so it's helped a lot of the dads find that really cool and interesting. So it's this very concrete feedback that they get. So after they've focused on this individual phase and made some progress in identifying their triggers, getting better at identifying their emotions and understanding them, and develop some coping strategies, that's when we would move into the co-parenting focus. And so this is phase, like I said, so you have to move successfully, right, to kind of keep going. And so dads who have engaged well in the individual focus can then move to the co-parenting focus, where they would focus entirely on the co-parenting relationship. So it's not about couples therapy. It's not about their intimate relationship. It's about how do you communicate as parents for the good of your children. And so we focus on that as a first place to begin for couples that are really having a hard time talking to each other and communicating well. So we try to focus on, defining what co-parenting is, teaching some communication skills, and having them do some problem solving in session together with the therapist if we think it is safe. If we're going to meet with co-parents together, we would have had to have had multiple sessions with the mother prior to getting to this phase. So we meet her in the assessment, and if she's going to come in for co-parenting, usually we'll have her in for a minimum of 3 other individual sessions to kind of be hearing from her throughout. Are they noticing any changes? These are the skills that we're going over with dad in treatment. These are the kinds of things he's learning, so that we can get a sense of if there's been any change at all, and also her investment in wanting to participate in co-parenting, or if she's really symptomatic herself, how would that potentially impact a communication session? Like, she's looking forward to co-parenting sessions because she wants to talk about his infidelity. Well, that's not really what we're going to be doing in those sessions. We're going to focus on these things. So it's really important that that happens. So after the co-parenting phase, we move to the restorative parenting, which is the last phase. And this is where we work with dads to help them make amends to their children and to work on their father-child relationship really specifically in person. So the clinician will, if he has a child who's 3 or older, will help him draft or create a amends statement where he will take accountability. So to acknowledge his behavior, and not in tons of detail, but something like, I know you saw me get into some fights with mom and I hurt her. Or I know you saw me drinking and breaking things in the house. So acknowledging some specific behaviors that were wrong, making an apology. I'm sorry that you had to see that. That was not okay for me to act like that. And then talking about the things that he's been doing in treatment to try to change. And that comes from, there was a study that came out of a group in Australia, and I'm not going to remember the authors' names right now, but they interviewed kids who had fathers who were domestically violent and asked them what they would want from their fathers after they were domestically violent. And those were the themes that came out of that qualitative study. Was they wanted acknowledgement, right? Because they were sick of people saying it never happened, right? They wanted an apology, like, I'm sorry, that was wrong. And they wanted them to change. So we try to help dads talk about those 3 things in developmentally age-appropriate ways with their child or children. So sometimes it's one session with a couple of their children, or sometimes it's broken up. So if they've got, a 12-year-old and a 2-year-old, well, actually the 2-year-old we may not do, but a 12-year-old and a 3-year-old, we might have them meet separately so that they can have some different conversations depending on the age. And we allow the child to, so after we prep the dad, we would then hold the session with the father and his children together, where he would then deliver the statement, and then they would practice some emotion regulation or some activity. So he'll share something he's learned, like teach them how to do diaphragmatic breathing, or he'll teach them how to do some muscle relaxation skills, or he'll teach them some sort of skill, or they'll play some emotion regulation game together. And so then the therapist might have a couple of sessions with the father and the child together to continue to work on those kind of co-regulation and positive play interactions with the dad and the child, depending on the needs. And then that's how the treatment ends. So I'm going to play you a short video that just, there's some voices of a few dads that have gone through the program and some therapists who've been practicing it. Go to that. It's only 3 minutes.
Change is an individual intervention for men who've had struggles in their co-parenting relationship because of significant conflict, aggression, violence, or substance misuse. Clinicians meet one-on-one with clients weekly. The intervention lasts 16 to 24 weeks. It addresses emotion regulation, communication, and relationship difficulties.
So connecting with my girlfriend at the time was both the problems, and DCF got involved. But in the end, she's taught us about anger issues and just controlling your emotions and active listening and really connecting with each other on not just a relationship matter, but a parental sense.
Clinicians work to understand the unique needs of each father and help him develop skills to improve his relationships with his co-parent and his children.
The part where you listen to how everybody feel, that was most helpful. Because before coming here, I didn't like to listen to how everybody else feel. I only cared about how I felt in both situations and how to handle it. And I didn't want to listen to anyone.
A lot of other programs out there have labeled these fathers either as a perpetrator, a batterer, an abuser. And Fathers for Change is unique in that they identify them as a father.
They look at the role of the father, as a spouse, as a parent, as a co-parent.
The Fathers for Change model incorporates skill building in addition to helping parents reflect on how their past has influenced their present, and not just how they're thinking and feeling, but how other people are thinking and feeling in response to their pasts or their current interactions.
Fathers for Change begins with a comprehensive assessment to be able to tailor the intervention to the unique needs of the father and family. The intervention focuses on reflective functioning to increase fathers' understanding of their thoughts, feelings, and actions, and those of their partner and children. It also provides practical teaching and practicing of emotion regulation and communication skills. It allows for optional co-parent participation and assessment, weekly parallel sessions, and conjoint co-parenting focus sessions if she chooses to participate. Fathers have the opportunity to think about the perspective and experiences of their children and to make amends for past behaviors with clinician support.
My husband has done anger management. He's done psychoeducation classes around domestic violence. And he's done domestic violence groups. And nothing worked. If you asked me 6 months ago what you should do with my husband, I would tell you throw him in jail. But this was the only program that worked for him. I've seen such a significant change in his behavior. It's a whole new person.
Quite a few fathers tell me that they have been very happy that they engaged in the program. Because it's just completely different.
I love this program. It's really helpful. Yeah, I tell my friends, I tell everybody about it. Family, I tell everybody, anybody I need to, anybody important, I tell about this program.
If you want to be the best father you could be possible, I would go to a class just to prevent myself from ever being in a situation of being either terrible co-parenting or feeling like I don't want to be a father anymore or it's too much stress. Like, I never have had that thought after doing this program, ever.
Fathers for Change. Healthy fathers means healthy families raising healthy children.
All right, so I'm just going to tell you quickly about some of our research support so far. I won't spend a ton of time on this. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to go into more detail, but I want to make sure I leave some time for questions. So we have, I would say we have emerging evidence base for Fathers for Change. I've been working on developing the evidence base for some time. It's hard to get money for such, but I've been doing it. And so we've gotten, we've had 4, I'd say small size studies. Well, 3 small and 1 large. We have completion rates for the program are range between 67 and 80% for the different samples. We did first an open trial in a substance misuse treatment clinic, and all fathers remained nonviolent during the treatment, and they were able to reduce their substance use. So that was our initial, like, let's just see if we can even get dads to do this program. So that worked out okay. So then we did a small randomized pilot where we randomized dads to either Fathers for Change or an individual drug counseling. So these were all dads who had co-occurring substance use problems. And what we found in that trial is that those who were randomized to Fathers for Change were more likely to complete treatment than the individual drug counseling, and they exhibited less violence or aggression toward themselves and their partners. So meaning that the fathers reported they were using less violence and their partners were also using less violence. So one of the things that we heard about a lot with the dads who had co-occurring substance use is that they would become aggressive in the context of their use of substances, which is not uncommon, but also their partners would get aggressive with them sometimes when they use substances. So they reported, reductions in that, which I think that's because the partners participated in the treatment, whereas in individual drug counseling, they did not. We also found in that study that fathers in the Fathers for Change condition had better father-child interactions. So we did videotaped interactions with dads before treatment and after. And the dads that got Fathers for Change had much better dyadic reciprocity and kind of interchange with their children than dads who got individual drug counseling, who actually looked worse post-treatment. And I think that's because they got clean, they stopped using, and maybe they were more present, but they didn't get any support around how to engage with their kids or improving their parenting. So I think that, so we can help dads stop using their substances, but if then they don't have any skills to interact with their kids, actually, I think that puts them at higher risk for relapse, because then they get stressed out by the fact that they're not as connected with their children. Then we did a randomized trial in residential substance use treatment directly, where we embedded Fathers for Change in a residential substance abuse program. And we had 30 fathers who had Fathers for Change and 30 who got a more standard parent education program, both individually delivered. So they got, some counseling, social support from the counselor in addition to getting the treatment itself. And the Fathers for Change group had significantly greater improvements in emotion regulation and were less likely to relapse within the 3 months after the residential program than the dads who got the parent education. I will say that the parent education was still helpful, that they'd still actually liked it and benefited from it, but the Fathers for Change had this additional benefit. The last thing I'll talk about here is that we implemented Fathers for Change in a state welfare system here in Connecticut. So in my state, the Department of Children and Families was very interested in this model, and so they were rolling out a new approach for domestic violence, where they really wanted to focus more on fathers and families as a whole. And so they rolled out a program called the Intimate Partner Violence Family Assessment and Intervention Response. And they wanted Fathers for Change to be one of the intervention that was offered as part of that, in addition to having a family navigator who was like a case manager for the family. So each family would get a clinician and a navigator team that was assigned to them. So this was funded by our Department of Children and Families. There were 6 community agencies across the state of Connecticut, we're a small state, to deliver this intervention either in home, in community, or office, depending on the needs of the family. And the idea was to engage the entire family in assessment and then engagement in services as needed. So this probably isn't all that interesting to you, but these are the regions of our state where we were offering the service. So we had 373 dads that have been referred for assessment in Fathers for Change since we started the rollout. You can see the mixed racial ethnic background here of the sample, which is consistent with our state. We had a 73% completion rate for Fathers for Change, which in a child welfare referred population is really great. We're really excited about that. So they like it. That's the good news. Now we need to know, is it actually helping, right? So Fathers for Change was associated with reductions in intimate partner violence and children's exposure to parental conflict. So we interviewed parents before treatment and after. So this is more of a program evaluation, so pre-post assessments. And so mothers reported significant reductions in IPV from pre to post treatment, and significant reductions in their children's exposure to conflict. This was using the abusive behavior inventory. And not only was it a significant reduction, but it actually was, by statistics, but it also was a clinically significant reduction in that the average ABI score pre-treatment was in the 20s, the high 20s, which is well above the abuse range. And then post-treatment, the average score was around 9, like just below 9. So a 10 is a cutoff for an abusive relationship. So we move the average score to below the abusive range, which I thought was really good. And it doesn't mean that we obliterated all IPV. That would be wonderful, but I don't think we're going to do that. But we're making an impact. Dads self-reported significant improvements in their emotion regulation and reflective functioning on self-report questionnaires, and they reported significant improvements in their mood symptoms and PTSD symptoms. And the mothers also reported significant improvements in their symptoms of negative mood and post-traumatic stress. And this is just, I'm going to end with this one. This is just a graph that shows that in terms of post-traumatic stress, by delivering this intervention, we're seeing reductions in post-traumatic stress symptoms for the whole family. Fathers are reporting, their mothers are reporting, and then children are reporting, children that are old enough, we're reporting reductions in post-traumatic stress symptoms. So we are doing some additional studies. Right now, I'm doing a trial comparing Fathers for Change to the standard Duluth model batter intervention. We're just about done recruitment for that, so I should have results of that hopefully within the next 6 months. And we're also doing a propensity score matched study of the child protection referrals to those who did not receive Fathers for Change to see if there are differences in repeat reports of child maltreatment in the 12 months after they received the intervention. So stay tuned. I should have those results soon. So I'm going to stop there because we just have a few more minutes left. So I'm going to stop share. Actually, I'm just going to put up, whoops. This is my email address in case people are wanting that for additional information. But I'm going to stop the share. And I did see at least one question in the chat, I think. Okay, someone wanted information on that study. Which study was that, Christina?
You were talking about the qualitative study for children whose parents had domestic violence, I think.
Yes. Let me see if I can I'll quickly look for that while, if there are other questions that someone wants to ask in the meantime.
Another question I actually had is this an intervention that's currently available in Hartford County?
It is, yes. The agency is CHR.
I can always email you too.
Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah. Okay. I will find it. It's like, I think I know the author's name, but I don't want to say the wrong thing and then have it people. So yeah, I have it in my list of references. What is the process and criteria to train clinicians in this intervention? What a great question. I actually do have a slide on that that I can put up. I just didn't want to take time on that if that's not something people were interested in. So people have to get, so this is somewhat similar to some of the other evidence-based treatments out there now, like CPP. So people have to be master's level clinicians to do this. It's not like the other batter interventions that, kind of paraprofessionals do, because it's a therapy. So master's level clinicians, it's helpful if they've had some experience with family work, because it isn't just an intervention for adults. You have to be thinking about the child's experience and keeping the child in mind. So we do some training in, child development and child perspective taking as part of the training that I do, but it helps if people have had some background in that. So there's a training right now. We're doing it virtually because of the pandemic. That could change. I have done them in person before, but we have a virtual training. It's about 14 hours over 3 days. So it's broken up into chunks. And I'm sorry, that's dates. Never mind the dates to be scheduled in March. This was for a group that actually is going to go forward with the training. And then there's consultation 2 times a month for 12 months. With the idea that people take and do 3 cases during consultation. And the reason for 3 is that the diversity of cases that you can get and the kinds of issues that come up are just vast. And so it's really helpful to have consultation as you're getting started with this kind of work, especially if you haven't worked with offenders before or those who've caused harm. And on the consultation calls, people will present cases just as part of the training. So that's the requirement. And I have, there is a full manual and there's a slide deck for the training, and I have video vignettes from sessions, both good sessions and bad sessions. And I actually have a book that's going to be coming out. I've submitted it to the publisher. They're reviewing it. So it'll probably be at least 6 more months before the book is actually out. But there is a book coming also that describes how to do the intervention in a lot of detail with case examples. Is this offered prior to an IPV incident for parents struggling with co-parent stress? We have had some co-parents who've been referred where there haven't been any physical incidents yet, but there's concern about the verbal aggression and verbal disputes. I've also tailored it, kind of pared down some of it for folks who where it's just more we're worried about stress and like helping them with coping. All of the material is applicable. You might just spend a little less time talking about, the impact. You would talk about the impact of violence on children, but maybe you wouldn't spend as much time and think of, because they don't yet have children or they don't yet, haven't had an incident. So you wouldn't need to do details as much, but I think it would be a great fit for that, I think, given the nature of what's included. I've actually wanted to do it with pregnant couples who are at risk. That was one of the projects I was trying to get off the ground before the pandemic. So I think it would be a really good fit for that kind of setting. Maybe slightly shorter, but yeah. Any other last questions? I can definitely put like I said, I'll put my email in the chat. I'm happy to hear from folks. You follow-up questions, or if I mentioned a resource that you would like, I'm happy to send it to you. I really appreciated being here today. It was great to talk to all of you.
Thank you so much, Carla. I was looking so forward to this because it's and as I was listening to you, my brain was exploding off in many different directions. The implications of this, just even in child welfare, or one of the things that we're seeing are just high conflict divorce, where there may not be past that threshold of violence, but it certainly isn't comfortable for children. They're not thriving in that kind of an environment. So neither are the parents. So you've got my brain going like crazy, but I think the biggest takeaway is the gap that I've always seen is that statement of amends.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think about that. And in fact, with children going into care, we often have so much busyness around that children aren't aware of specifically what the trauma is. They know something's amiss, but the parents are very invested in keeping up the idea that it's a big bad agency that took our family apart. And so no one ever gets to kind of name it, claim it, make amends around it. And I'm sure it's the same thing with intimate partner violence as well. There's this polarization that occurs. So repair is the strongest part of a structure. So I think that's the part that I'm just enjoying taking away from today's talk. And I wish we could have you around for the whole day. This is so my brain could settle down. But I appreciate your accessibility as well, that you've shared how folks can get in touch with you. Let us know when the book does come out, because we'd love to make everyone aware of that as well.
Great. Yeah, I will be happy to do that.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here.